Well, hey everybody, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop. Welcome to another edition of Shift Break. Today's episode is brought to you by La Marzocco, and they've been making espresso machines there by hand in Florence, Italy since 1927. That's nearly 100 years of serving the specialty retail community around the world. I mean, I've grown up with La Marzocco and always could depend upon them for their beauty, their reliability, and the innovation that they pursue with their espresso machines for the benefit of the end user. And that's why I love their equipment. Innovation like the KB90 espresso machine, it's got those straight in locking portafilters that allow for more ergonomics. You've also got the Linea PB, which is a classic Linea design with all of the technology of today that allows baristas ultimate control over their espresso. And there are a lot of different kinds of configurations and styles of machines to suit your needs. Go visit them at lamarzocousa.com, and better yet, talk to a salesperson, info@lamarzocousa.com, and get your cafe outfitted with the best equipment possible. Again, that's over at lamarzocousa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rattleware. At rattleware.com, they are producing smallwares that make a big difference in your cafe. It's stuff that you just rely on, the whisks, the pitchers, the shot glasses, and everything in between. That really holds the whole thing together, and you just want stuff that works. And that's what motivates them at rattleware.com. They want things that are intuitive, that are functional, that work in the cafe, and can stand up to use in the average cafe. They can rattle around there. I don't know if that's where the name Rattleware comes from, and they're going to be okay, right? So go to rattleware.com for your smallware needs. Wonderful people, rattleware.com. Okay, everyone. Well, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something to do with boundaries. And I think that this is one of those things that is really common. It's very common for small business owners, entrepreneurs out there who have basically blurred the lines between business and personal in their own lives and therefore project that onto their staff. We talked about this a little bit ago related to the idea of toxic vulnerability, where people treat their staff as a sounding board for their personal life. And it's like, I don't really need to hear that. And nor do I feel like I need to receive that. But it gets dumped anyway. And it's because there is a certain level of immaturity of a leader that requires them to simply gush and, be vulnerable, and all that stuff is fine. Vulnerability within professional realms is fine. But, to a degree, you have to remain professional, right? This is a job. It is a business. It is not a therapy session. And nor do I feel that baristas should require this kind of therapeutic relationship with anyone in their business, like a leader or a coworker. If that happens by default or just it happens to be a conversation, okay, that's fine. But it's not really officially part of what your compensation is for working in a cafe. A cafe is a stage on which you act the part of a barista or trainer or whatever your position might be. But today I want to talk about how these lines that are blurred for owners often will lead to owners blurring the line for baristas by making them available or almost like requiring them to be available at all times. This happens with text threads, Slack channels, last minute communications. When you as a leader send something out and in the back of your mind, this is really last minute, it might be at like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., you just sit up straight, out of bed, if you're going to bed that early. You're like, oh, I forgot this thing. And so you're furiously texting and you're thinking like, oh, the future of my business is determined by whether we get, the right amount of, scones tomorrow. And, somebody doesn't pick up, they don't respond right away. And the urgency in your mind is just thinking, oh, this is terrible. Now, let's face it, this might be a problem that you created. But what happens is we project it as other people's problems because they're not jumping into the same kind of frenetic urgency that we have to solve it right in the moment, when in fact it was a planning issue. And that happens all the time. And you're learning how to be a leader and an owner, right? That's understandable. But projecting it as though other people are required to make up for your slack, that you give in the operations is wrong. That is a toxic expectation. Staff should not have to be required to, or you should not imply that they are required to help you do the job that you should be doing. If nobody can pick up that slack and they're within the realm of their rights as a barista to have a personal life and they're not on the Slack channel or text thread, then it's okay. That doesn't mean that you get to question their quote unquote loyalty. When you start doing that, now you know you're leading a cult and not a coffee shop. Okay. This is not your followership. This is simply a job. It is simply a business. And I know to you, it is a lot more than that. But we do need to make sure that we, in order to show common respect to those who are working for us, are respecting their boundaries. Now, that goes for their schedule with blackout dates and limitations that they have, respecting those. And that goes also for personal time, that you're not going to, in some way, subconsciously, because you do it, blur those lines for them and then praise them so much that they feel like now they're obligated to do it. Past episodes, we've said the resourcefulness of many baristas to overcome the challenges of coffee shops often is an indictment against the coffee shop's operations rather than a compliment to their character. Now, it is a credit to their character that they would do that, but they shouldn't have to do half of the things that they do have to do because they should have been taken care of already. That's true for limitations of equipment or space, poor planning, poor communication. In that you can't get on without your staff should be a question in your mind. Why is that? Not that you shouldn't be depending on them. You have to. And that's fine. That's a blessing to be in community with people, working together to create something beautiful. But are you projecting the responsibility that you have onto somebody else and kind of blaming them for not helping you solve a problem that you created? That is largely unfair. And you have to make sure that you're not doing this because I think it just happens naturally. Okay. You also, I want to recognize this, are likely the kind of person who wants your staff to do well. And this is not all negative. You want this place to run well. You're not doing this to try to be mean to people. No one's saying that. You're not trying to pull one over on them or be shifty about things, right? But the interpretation of this lack of discipline in communication, these boundaries, will be that that's what's happening. And if you don't want that, then you need to be the one to, take full responsibility. And if there is something that, late at night, you're like, oh no, okay, now it's maybe you have a manager or maybe you have baristas that are lead baristas, but in that moment, you need to step back into that role of responsibility, get it done yourself, respect their private time, and don't expect that they're going to be available at all hours of the day at all times. Your business can have some automated parts because of systems, but you are still required to be a part of the solution in the problems that come up in the business. And it's a discovery process. Over time, there are going to be new ways for things to get confused or messed up and new problems and new challenges. As you get more successful, there's just different challenges. And that's natural. It's not always a sign of dysfunction. What is a dysfunctional thing, though, again, is when we start to project, when we start to abdicate our responsibilities or shift it over to somebody else. And that's how people get burned out. Again, this is a job, it is a professional environment, and that courtesy of boundaries and not having an unrealistic expectation of people being just fully available outside the hours of business is something that needs to be addressed. You can listen to the episode Reasonable Expectations, a shift break episode that addresses this as well. But I hope today's episode was helpful. And truly, I think if you require and you rely on people to be available outside of business hours, then there's probably a need for you to adjust your business structure and strategy in order to operate with integrity and not on these unofficial obligations to that people feel they need to do out of a sense of, loyalty or fear. It's a tension that doesn't need to exist in the business. So it might require that you take a look at things and say, okay, what needs to change about what we do and how we do it in order for myself and my team to have the proper balance and boundaries that keep it professional, keep it fulfilling, and working well within the scope of a business. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, and I will see you here next week on another edition of Shift Break, from Keys to the Shop.